be a crowd gathering, so I don't know if this is a flash mob or what this is, but let's see what these people have to say.
Good morning. We are thankful for this chance to talk to you about our upcoming fundraiser. But first, we'd like to give you an opportunity to participate in this announcement.
We'd like you to respond to some key words. So each time you hear the word auction, please snap your fingers.
When you hear the word donation, please clap 2 times.
When you hear the word youth, please yell out, "Love ya." Love ya. Now, let's practice.
Auction.
Donation.
Youth.
Love ya.
Our annual senior high youth auction is fast approaching. This Saturday, February 1st, we will fill this fellowship hall with lots of food, fellowship, live and silent auctions, with donations from our youth and congregation.
Dinner will be served by the youth from 5 to 6 p.m. For dinner this year, we will be making barbecue chicken and baked potatoes, salads, and warm blueberry cherry cobbler with ice cream for dessert.
The silent auction is from 5 to 7:15 p.m. Our live auction will start at 6 o'clock. Childcare is available for ages 2 through grade 6 from 6 to 8:30 p.m.
We hope that you have taken a chance to see the donations sitting in the lobby. Please take the updated list of donations on the tables home with you. Our youth have been working hard to be creative with their donations for the auction. We are so thankful for the donations of the congregation and continue to accept donations all week.
One last reminder, this is the only fundraiser the youth does all year. All proceeds benefit our summer service project and other yearly activities. Our goal is to raise $20,000 at the youth Thank you. Auction. This summer we will travel to Highland Retreat in Virginia. It is a Mennonite camp with a ministry similar to Spruce Lake. We will do repairs and cleanup as well as helping with the camp program and spend time with the campers.
We hope to see you all at the youth auction. Thank
Thank you guys. We do love you. I like that the congregation got creative and thought up their own noise for the warm cobbler with ice cream. I was expecting some cheers for the childcare, but that didn't come. And just as an aside, the junior high does the childcare for the auction, and so some of the proceeds from the auction also help with junior high and Alive and some of their programs as well. I would just like to begin our congregational meeting by saying it's great to see everybody here and to have us together as a family to talk about some important things, and I would just like to begin in prayer. Father, we just thank you so much for this day. Thank you for the sunshine and that we could all come here and are able to worship you in freedom. We thank you that we have heard again some honest sharing in our congregation and in church service. Lord, I just pray so much that you would continue to break through our walls that we have in our lives and through the walls that we may have with you. I thank you so much for the barriers that are coming down, for the chains that are breaking. So many stories, Lord, you have been so faithful. And I just thank you for the way that you're showing person after person how much you love them. I just pray that you would give us strength and courage to do the hard work of emotional spirituality so that this church can be all that you have meant it to be, and that we can be a blessing in this town and in the world. Be with us now as we talk about the business things of our church. Help us to have open minds and that your Spirit would be here. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good morning, everyone. The focus of this meeting this morning will be primarily financial. There'll be an update on the lead pastor search process, but this is really the one meeting out of the year where the majority of the energy will be focused around numbers and things of that nature. A couple things before we get into that I want to mention. The youth were up here talking about the auction. One thing that ties in really well to what I'll be saying here in a little bit is there's very few dollars that are allocated to both junior high and senior MYF in our church budget. Primary reason for that is most of those dollars are raised through that church auction, the MYF auction that you heard about this morning. So keep that in mind as we're going through those figures. That is a very, very important activity for the funding of what the youth do. We're going to ask for a vote at the end of this meeting for the church budget. So I want to make sure that we answer every question we possibly can this morning. So there'll be a time where the mics will be passed around here towards the end of the meeting. I'll stay here afterwards for anyone who's not comfortable asking a question. And we'll also keep the ballots open through next Sunday. So if anyone wants to catch me on the phone or via email during the course of this week, we'll go ahead and that'll be an opportunity. So to the extent that you don't have your questions satisfied this morning, certainly we'll have opportunity to discuss as over the next week. When it comes to things related to numbers, there's some of you in this room that can take a look at take a peek at the one-page sheet that was on your tables and in your church mailboxes last week. Look at it and probably vote right now, affirm or do not affirm. There's some of you that would probably like to spend an hour with me looking for golf balls in the weeds, digging through, line item after line item. And I'd be glad to do that, but we'd have to do it after this time this morning. For this morning, I'm going to try to shoot in the middle and hopefully address as many of people's questions proactively. The other thing before I get into some of the specific numbers, I typically hesitate to say thank you to an individual in a public setting just because there's so many people in this room that do so many things voluntarily for this congregation. But one person that I'm not sure if she's even here this morning, I'm not going to ask her to stand, I'm not going to ask for any form of applause or anything like that, would be Sue Detweiler. Sue very quietly has worked behind the scenes on our teller team for at least the last 10 years. It could be longer. And she's transitioning out of that role. And I just want to say thank you to Sue. Her and so many other people do so much behind the scenes to make sure that everything that I'm bringing to you this morning is accurate and is recorded properly. It starts there. If we don't get things recorded properly, then anything I bring to you here today is going to be inaccurate. So I want to say thank you to Sue for her years of service. I want to go back to, I guess it was probably sometime in October of this past year. Many of you may recall me crying somewhere right around this spot. I don't need to go and relive that necessarily specifically, but it was a whole host of issues that stockpiled on each other, and the last thing was the passing away of our kids' 4-month-old puppy. So I've never been a real big dog lover, never really a dog hater, but not a dog lover. So I've learned that a lot of you in this room are dog lovers by how many people came up to me afterwards and want to know how the dog would happen and follow up since then. So I felt like I should really come back, which is kind of where we are today, because there's a lot of loose ends there that I feel like need to be tied up. So you got to walk with me on this one. So I'm back in October at this point, and dog has passed away. Wife is on the couch with 3 kids, 8, 6, and 4, crying, wailing, it's just extreme. And I have to leave for the congregational meeting. I can't wait a minute longer. So it's wail, 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 shut the door, silence, get in the car, drive to church. I don't know what's going on once I get here. We do the congregational meeting, I'm crying up here, I get home, expecting that when I open the door, it's going to be the same sound and scene that I left 2 hours earlier. There were several of you who, after the meeting, said, I'm sorry to hear about your dogs passing away, but kids are resilient, they'll be fine, those type of words. I had no reason to agree or disagree with the kids being resilient comment. I just never had a chance for my kids to be resilient. Well, anyone who believes that kids are resilient are 100% correct, because this is what I came back to upon my arrival back. My 3 kids are at the computer, and that screen is like www.puppies.com, so they have moved on. They were looking for a new dog. And I gotta be honest, there's a part of me that's thinking, what if I was the one who was no longer there? Start looking for my replacement. So kids are resilient. If you have any questions about that, this is like a good example of that. And about just after Christmas, they have a new addition to the family. That's Teddy. So hopefully Teddy lasts more than 4 months. Thank you everyone for your, hopefully no one prayed for me in terms of my dog, but thank you for your well wishes. Moving on to the financial side of things, I know that's a difficult transition, but it's a very positive transition because as I communicated, I guess it was probably the Sunday after the new year started, we were blessed to be able to balance all of our financial obligations for 2013 once again. So I want to say thank you to everyone for your generosity in allowing that to become a reality. You'll see here, kind of how the numbers broke out in terms of receipts and disbursements. One thing that we'll come back to is Mennonite missions. Our target for Mennonite missions was $110,300. We actually received $89,000, just shy of $90,000 there. I'll speak to that a little bit more clearly as we get a little bit further into this. But essentially, the way we handle Mennonite missions, and many of you are aware of this, we've been doing this for the last at least 8 years, is we have a target. And typically that target is more than what we received the previous year. And so we tell the Mennonite mission agencies what our target is, but more realistically, what we think we're going to receive. So we want to give ourselves a stretch goal, but we also we try to ground that stretch goal to the agencies with some degree of reality of what they could reasonably expect. So 89,843 is really close to the number that I would have said to those agencies to kind of reasonably rely on. 110,300 was sort of our target that we wanted to get to. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. The receipt side of things would really be any monies received for Mennonite education, general operating, or Mennonite missions. And last year, the receipt total was $1,462,000 and change. This year, the total was $1,484,000 and change. That's about a $22,000 increase or 2% increase in receipts. That's not a huge percentage increase, but when I show you this next slide, it's significant because this is what our receipts have been over the last 5 years. If you can see those numbers, and this is as far back as I have numbers to go back to, but in 2009, we were at 1.7 million. 2012, we were at 1.4 million change. 2013, that number is up a bit. So this is really the first time in at least the last 5 years, and that's the only numbers I had readily available, that we've seen a year-over-year increase in giving. So I see that as a positive, and just want to say thank you to everyone for that. And then, coming into this year, for those of you who aren't familiar, we were blessed to be able to pay off the line of credit that we had. From 2008, we did balance our church budget really for the first time ever. So we were able to get that cleaned up before the end of last year. So at the end of last year, we were debt-free for the first time in over 10 years. And to the extent that we could balance 2013's budget, we'd be able to remain debt-free. So as you can see, as a result of balancing that budget, as of the end of the year, we have no operating debt on the line of credit, and we have no building loan. This is looking at operating expenses. This is the lights, custodial staff, electricity, all the things, pastoral salaries, anything that is not related to Mennonite education or related to Mennonite missions. And you can see that over the last number of years, those expenses have decreased. So as our receipts have decreased, the reason we've been able to balance these last number of years is we've been able to decrease our expenses at the same rate or better than what our receipts have decreased. But we're starting to find our way towards the bottom. There isn't a whole lot more quote-unquote cutting that can be done without it really being felt. Most of the focus of those reductions in operating expenses have been things that would be, I would say, typically are non-ministry related. So it's how can we do a better job of buying paper towels, those types of things. And we're finding our way towards the bottom of what we can really do without reducing staffing and those types of things. So that's kind of where that stands. One thing that isn't in these figures, which I pulled out of 2013, even though we spent the money, there was about $17,000 spent for a boiler conversion to natural gas for a couple of reasons. One is because of where the pricing of natural gas is. Two is because of the age of that boiler. And I want to thank Marl Landis and the group that worked with him to pull this off, because this was really a self-initiated we need to do this type of effort. And we're always open to those kind of opportunities if people want to take them on. But I wish I had a picture of the old boiler, but if you can picture a big boiler, it's pretty massive. It makes a lot of noise and it's quite loud and will scare young children. These two things replace that boiler, and it's quiet as as a Prius. Super quiet. You can hardly even tell it's running. So that boiler conversion was done this past year, and I'm grateful to Merle and the other folks that helped him with that. I want to move on to the budget for the year, and I'm not going to, just going to get to my pages here. When it comes to what numbers I'll really dig into versus what numbers I'm just going to skirt over is what I would say are significant or reasonably significant changes over last year's budget. So if it's something that we were doing last year and it's the same as this year, I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time on it. If you have questions about those types of things, that would be good for the Q&A session, or see me after. A lot of times when you see reductions in a line item or increases in a line item, if I don't speak to them, but you see them going up or going down, it's probably a number of little things that are moving that number. So it could be a couple $100 items or a couple $50 items. If I speak to it, then there's probably something else to it that needs to be a little more communication. The other thing is that when we do budgeting, typically we do not adjust a budget number after 1 year of actual performance being different than what was budgeted. A better way to say what I just said would be to give you an example. Let's just pretend we go back 3 years and there's a line item. It's, children's Sunday school. Let's say the line item on the budget's $1,000, but then 3 years ago we only spent $600. Well, the next year we're not going to budget $600. We'll budget $1,000 again. But then if that next year we only spend $700, then the following year we might budget $600 or $700 or $800. So we kind of allow a couple years of actual being less than a historic budgeted number before we change that budgeted number. Because if we don't, a lot of times there's certain line items that may be $600 one year, but then they're $1,100 the next year, and to be moving those things around all the time probably doesn't make sense. So when you see some of these things, I think it'll make a little bit more sense to you. So this is where we are in terms of the aggregate budget. $1,093,000 last year, $1,074,000 this year. The way that shakes out is that ministry operations is down. That comes out to be, I think, roughly around $13,000. It's on your papers. I don't have that figure off the top of my head. And then Mennonite missions, again, that target for Mennonite missions was reduced from $110,300 to $104,500. Again, this comes back to that target. If you remember from earlier, I said we received $90,000 towards Mennonite missions this year. And our goal for last year, our target for last year was $110,300. Because that gap was almost $20,000, or more than $20,000, we felt like we needed to reduce our target a little bit, be able to go back to those Mennonite agencies and say, hey, for next year, our target is going to be $104,500. That's our stretch goal, because we only brought in $90,000 this year, so $104,500 is still a stretch goal, and we want to stretch ourselves. And we want those organizations to understand that we're trying to stretch. But we also want them to have some real reality that says, hey, last year it was $90,000. And we've been kind of on a downward trend here. So let's try to either fix that or plan on something in the $80,000 to $90,000 range. So I want to bring that up. It's never perfect, and I'm open to other ways that we can handle this, but we want to stretch, but we also want to help these organizations understand what they can reasonably plan for. And so I think we're doing a decent job of that, but there may be a better way, and we're open to hearing feedback on that. If we get into, I would say, what I'll call category by categories, and this is where you'll start to see some things moving around. Like take Mission and Compassion Ministries. There's about 60 different line items that make up that total. And some of those line items are budgeted for items as small as like $20. And so when you see a change of 19.5 to 17.2, there is no like we're taking this out or we're cutting this majorly. It's made up of a lot of littles. It's $50 here, $100 there, spread out over line items that we probably haven't been spending to the budgeted number for the last number of years. Fellowship and Worship Ministries, you'll see that being maybe a larger shift lower. And the main reasons for that going lower, beyond a lot of little things are that we were able to upgrade through some contributions that were made, some of the audiovisual equipment in the sanctuary, things like the projectors, and I think there was some equipment in the sound area that was upgraded. Previously, we had been spending a fair amount of money to replace bulbs and to do things like that, so our budgeted items related to AV had been higher, but with the new equipment, we feel like we could reduce some of those expenses. We also had some monies in last year's budget for the purpose of buying some new equipment, and that was funded by donors specifically giving towards that. Beyond that, in Fellowship and Worship Ministries, we've been spending a little bit less than what we had been budgeting for outside guest ministers, so we just reduced that number. That was about $500 of reduction. Beyond that, everything else is pretty consistent with what it had been previously. Moving on to the next grouping of line items here. A couple things that I'll speak to in relation to this. You'll see under administrative, I put in there interest. The biggest reason for the drop in that number was a reduction in what we spend every year on interest. Because of our ability to eliminate the debt, the line of credit debt, by the end of last year, we had in this year's budget interest expense, assuming that we couldn't eliminate that debt, because just the timing of when the budget was completed last year and when that debt was eliminated. So last year's budget assumed that we still were carrying over $100,000 of line of credit balance. And the actuality is moving into next year, that's not there, so we can reduce that number significantly. The other thing is a reduction in what we're spending on auditing expense for the church books. The next thing would be pastoral admin ministry. This is a big number because this is where we capture basically all the salaries in the church, from custodial to pastoral team to health benefits. It's all being captured in that number. And it looks reasonably flat, but there's some things happening behind the scenes there, even though the net effect is flat. One is that there's a 2% cost of living adjustment in those figures for anyone who's on payroll at Saturday Night Church. So that's going on behind the scenes there. The other thing is that there's some provisions in these figures to allow for some degree of overlap for whoever the next lead pastor is of Saturday Night Church, along with Jerry being in the role at the same time. We're not saying that's going to happen. We really don't know if it's going to happen, but we're kind of planning for the worst case scenario, which is that we would be up an additional pastor for some window of time as we do that transition. So that's in those figures. So we kind of took the worst case, to use that term, worst case, from a financial perspective, and that's what's in those numbers. The other thing that's in those numbers that would have been communicated, probably I think it was back in the summer, was Mary's desire to transition from her full-time role into a part-time role. We hired Jessica Hedrick to take on Mary's responsibilities related to children's ministry. So Mary's compensation in those figures is from full-time to three-quarters time. And Mary, if you right here, if you want to just maybe speak to that a little bit clearer, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that people understood, because I had heard some people talking about it and had maybe misunderstandings about how this all happened. And specifically, me going to three-quarter time has come from my desire to be operating in integrity here at the church, because God has called me to Haiti right now, about 8 to 12 weeks out of the year. So I'm just simply asking not to be paid for the time I'm in Haiti, and when I'm here, I will be here like I've always been as far as youth ministry. When I'm not here, I'm totally not here. So basically, I just wanted to make sure that people understood that. It's not a lack of desire to be in ministry. It's that God is calling me to Haiti, and I simply don't want to be paid here at the church for when I'm serving God in Haiti. So thanks to the team for allowing that flexibility for me to follow what I feel God's leading me into.
Thanks, Mary. The next thing I want to make mention of is this MEP financial need line item. And this is now the third year that we've been using this MEP financial need language. The other side of the MEP financial need is the MEP financial commitment. So again, this is the third year we've been doing it, but I don't want to assume that everyone's completely familiar with how we're handling this now, because it is different. If we have, say, $700,000 of annual tuition expense to the various Mennonite Christian schools, Quakertown Christian, Penview, and Christopher Dock, if that total is $700,000, It's going to be split between MEP financial commitment and MEP financial need. In the case of this year's budget, what's budgeted for MEP financial need is $218,202. What that number represents is the amount of monies that those parents who have kids in the schools are saying we can't afford this figure. In this case, it's $218,202. The opposite side of that is the way we come to this number is every single parent who has a child in the schools says this is what I can commit to in terms of being able to give. We also have a way of helping them by virtue of their household finances and working with the schools, be able to help them come up with a number that they, based upon some numbers that get run, what they should be able to commit to. So what is left over is this MEP financial need. We'll call it, this is the unfunded portion. This is the need portion of it. The need portion of MEP, an education plan, goes in the church budget. The commitment portion, so every family saying, I can give $5,000, I can give $10,000, I can give more than what my requirement is. And that happens a lot. We've got some families in the program where the specific amount of tuition for their kids might be 20 grand, but they say, I'll give 25, because they know that they're going to help to fund some others. So the need portion is what goes in the budget. We've been doing this for a number of years. When I say that the MEP financial commitment has balanced, it means basically that the sum total of every family's commitment was received where it should have been received by the end of the year. So in other words, we can't track, if I'm just looking at people here, so I don't even know who's got kids in schools and not. If Ong says I can give 3,000, Randy says I can give 2,000, and if Ed says I'll give 5,000, that's a total of 10,000. We track the total of 10,000, but we can't track whether Ong's giving the 3,000 he said he was going to give, and Randy's giving the 2,000 he said he was going to give, and Ed was going to give, if he gave the 5,000 he was going to give. We only can track the total 10,000, and every year that we've been doing this, which is now 3 years, what has been committed in the aggregate has been received in the aggregate. So hopefully that helps to shed a little bit of light in it. We have to tread a little bit lightly because there's certain things we can and can't do based upon IRS guidelines. So that's why we can't track Ong and Randy's and Ed's contribution. But we can track the aggregate that we said we were going to raise 10,000, and did we raise 10,000? So this whole structure was put in place about 3 years ago. And here you can see the numbers broken out a little bit more for the 2013 and 14 school year. The total bill for Mennonite Education that will come to Saturday Night Church is $706,679. Of that bill, $488,477 has been said by families in the plan that my 1,000, my 2,000, my 5,000, my 10,000, add them all up. That's how you get to 488,477. What's left, that 282,202, which is the same number that you see there, is what the church budget is going to have to pick up. That's the financial need portion. So that's for those families in this room who have benefited or had kids go through the schools but no longer, and you say, well, I want to, somebody helped me when my kids were younger, I want to help someone else's kids. When you make a contribution to Saturday Night Church to the general fund, that's what you're helping to fund in that regard, the financial need. That figure, that 218,202, is roughly 30% of $706,679. That 30% is important because basically what that's saying is for every dollar of billing that Saturday Night Church gets for Christian education, about 70 cents of that dollar is being funded by the families, the specific parents whose kids are in the schools. The other 30 cents are coming back to the church budget. We've been doing this thing now for 3 years, and every year so far, we've been at 30%. The numbers move, the total tuition and how much people are going to commit to, but that 30% has been the same for 3 years. So that's kind of where we stand, and where we stand today is a whole heck of a lot better than where we stood in 2008 and before. Because prior to that, this was a source of a lot of conversation in the church, and I'm not sure it's always been positive. But for the last 3 years, any conversations that I've had with members of this congregation about Mennonite education, regardless of how people feel about the merits of it, have typically been very, very positive. And I want to thank 2 people in particular for getting us to this point. There's a lot of people that were involved, but in 2008, we didn't bounce. Everything was on the table in terms of how do we do this moving forward. Mennonite education was one of them. And one person that I want to mention, I don't know if he's here this morning, that kind of stepped right into the middle of a fight for lack of a better term, to figure out how we preserve men in education was John Long. And I'm going to mention John this morning because John was kind of the forefather of putting a group together called the Men in Education Advocacy Team. And that group, over a period of a number of years, kind of put together this way of doing things that we're doing now. John, I think he actually volunteered for that role. I think he saw that there was a need, saw value in men in education, and jumped into the middle of a circle and said, I'm going to help be part of the solution to this. And I want to mention John specifically this morning for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is where we are today in terms of how we handle men in education. But John, to his credit, is now transitioned from being head of that Men in Education Advocacy Team as of this past week. He's concluding his time, and a new chair for that group will be coming on board. So John deserved, earned that opportunity. The other person I want to mention specifically in this regard is in helping us get to the place where we are today. Again, lots of people contributing. John being one specifically. The other person being Karen Knopfsinger, who most of you probably know went home to be with the Lord just shortly after Christmas. Karen was part of that first Men in Education Advocacy Team group that started to meet to kind of to wrestle with this, how do we handle men in education? And if you can picture two sides of a discussion. One side is saying, don't do anything, it'll self-correct, and just pretend the fact that we didn't balance never happened. Let's give it let's roll the dice next year and see what happens. Let's let this ride one more year. Then the other side of it saying, you know what, this thing is broken. It's been broken for years. We got to throw it in the trash can and get rid of men in education plan. So this isn't like confrontational, this isn't like argumentative, but this is just sort of the reality of where we are in a congregation 5 years ago. And Karen, in those meetings, was always the person who, when we talked about cutting men in education, in other words, making it harder for certain families to be able to afford to send their kids to Mennonite schools, was always the one who would, in her head, I think she could picture who those kids were that would have been cut out of that opportunity, and was always advocating for that. And I can say honestly, I was probably a little bit more on the other side of the equation. And I probably had, in certain situations, would have disagreed with Karen and her philosophy and her approach. But I can tell you today, she was right, I was wrong, and we wouldn't be where we are now if it wasn't for Karen's ability to be that voice in that group. So, not because of her passing, but more in terms of a celebration of where we are today. But obviously, just want to say thank you to Karen and her role in that as well. So that's where we stand with regard to men in education. The other thing I want to mention here this morning is projected capital improvements. This building isn't getting any younger. We've done our best over the last number of years to do the things that we could afford to do, paint, things that have to be done, we did. But there's some pretty significant items out there that really need to be looked at from a capital standpoint. The first one is probably this roof. If you drive past it and look at it, you will see holes in the roof. We're probably past the point of being able to really do much of a patching. We did that 3-4 years ago. We're really at the point of really need to be replacing it, whether that's a month from now or 9 months from now or a year from now. It's certainly within the next 12 months we need to take that on. It's not a little number. It's a 50-year improvement or better, but it's a big nut. And then we've got a couple other things. There's another boiler that could be upgraded, and then all of our AC units are getting to a place where they probably methodically 5 a year or something like that could work through that. Parking lot sealing and restriping, forget the snow. The snow actually helps us with the striping because you can't see the lines anyway right now. But even if the snow wasn't there, there's kind of a blurry line in terms of whose spot is whose in the parking lot. That needs to be looked at. And then phone system replacement. There's a number of things in that regard. We have about $20,000 a year in the budget for things of this nature. So you can do the math. This totals out to be about $265,000, if I'm not mistaken. It's going to take us, 13 years to run through all that stuff. It's not going to we won't be able to cut it that way. We're probably, unless there's individuals and groups of people in the congregation that want to give specifically towards some of these improvements, we're going to have to look at borrowing to do some of these things, especially for items like the roof. To the extent we don't take care of it, we're just going to spend money fixing the problems that come out of it. So I don't want to, there's a lot of things that are positive when we talk about the finances side of our church. This feels a little bit Debbie Downer, but we also got to take this as it comes. The other thing I would say is there's an individual who, I mentioned this the last time we were together, I think it was back in December, that some of these things were looming. There was an individual who said, hey, I'd like to help with this, and said that they would be willing to contribute $10,000 towards whatever we determined to be the most appropriate use of that money. Individual isn't looking for any public recognition, but that opportunity to say, hey, I'd like to help with this exists. So if you want to talk to me or any member of the church board, that'd be great. I know Ethan Good, who's here, I saw him earlier, is a big fan of matching funds, but this $10,000 actually is not a matching gift. This individual was very clear that they're going to give the $10,000 regardless of whether everyone else gets a dime. You can ask Ethan what I'm talking about. So that's the capital improvements. The last thing I want to say, and then I'm going to ask Ed Brubaker to come up to give an update on, I will ask Ed to come up, but I got two other things I got to say. Just looking at my notes here. One of the things that started to happen in 2007, but then we had the 2008 year where we didn't balance, was we started working towards the establishment of what I would describe as 3 funds that would be available as sort of, I don't want to say trust funds, but they're essentially are trust funds that people could give monies towards, on a regular basis or at a time of death or sale of a business, sale of a house, whatever it might be. So we were going to establish those 3 funds back in 2008, but then we didn't balance in 2008. So talking about establishing trust fund type of giving for future needs didn't really feel appropriate when we had debt on our books. Now that we're back to a place where the debt isn't there, it feels appropriate that we should revisit some of those things. So the 3 funds that would be established would be, one would be essentially related to the building itself, building maintenance type of fund. Second fund would be related to funding that Mennonite education financial need piece. So people that want to give towards helping other families afford an education. And then the third fund would be a fund that would be used specifically to fund new ministries within the church that maybe don't have a line item on the church budget, but someone feels a call to a new way of doing mission, that there be monies available for that. So again, those aren't really so much regular annual giving type of funds. They're really there for folks if there's a death, or if there's somebody who sells a house and wants a place to put some funds that they know will be used for the future benefit of Sarah Mennonite Church. So that's some of the things we'll be working on over the next couple months. That's all that I have to update in terms of the financial side of who we are at Sarah Mennonite Church. Beyond that, there's a couple ballots on your tables. One is for this budget. So to the extent that you're comfortable affirming, you can do that now. To the extent that you want to ask a question when we do the Q&A, you're welcome to do that as well. To the extent that you want to wait until afterwards, talk to me or call me during the week, we'll keep the ballots open through next week. The other form is for the Gifts Discernment Team. The Gifts Discernment Team is the group throughout the congregation that meets usually once a year to look over nominations for church board members. So we need to add someone to the church board. We ask the congregation, who do you recommend for nomination to the church board? You guys write names in. Then the Gifts Discernment Team goes through those names and suggests who they think would be able to serve in that capacity, or think would be gifted enough to serve in that capacity. So looking for names of individuals to serve on the Gifts Discernment Team. You can fill them out now, or you can wait till the end. But you can leave those forms on the table when we're done. With that, I'm going to have Ed Brubaker come up and give us an update on the lead pastor search process. And then after he's done, we'll pass the mic around for questions and answers. I would ask that you can keep the questions towards items related to church finances. It would be appreciated. I just want to make sure that we're asking everyone to vote on something here that we keep them as much as possible the questions on church finances. If it seems like we've run out of financial related questions, then fair game for whatever else you want to ask.
Good morning, everyone. I appreciate this opportunity to give an update on behalf of the Leadership Search Committee, but before I did that, I thought I would share something personally. I think it was about a year ago, Jerry, is that right, when you asked us to think of a word that we wanted to focus on in the coming year. And the word that I chose was re-engage. And the reason I chose that word is, I don't know if it was like Jessica, but a number of years ago, I felt like I was maybe even over-involved in church, between church council chair, Sunday school teaching, choir at times, boys club leader years ago. And I really backed off a lot of things. And so last year, the word I chose was re-engage. When Nate called in October to ask about being on the Leadership Search Committee, in some ways I didn't feel like I had a lot of choice in the matter. And in fact, I think in my heart I was feeling some level of perhaps even called to that as well. But I thought, wanted to just reflect on that. It's mysterious at times the way God works in our lives.
Yeah.
But I did want to give just a brief update this morning. There's not a lot to report, but since we did have a meeting today, I did want to give a brief update. I don't know who all of the committee members are here today, and I didn't give them a heads up before that I was going to do this, but I would like you to know who is on the committee, and I will read their names, and if they could just stand at this point, that would be great. Julie Landis, Kara Durstein, Kevin Hoover, Eric Bishop, Alexis Flores, and myself. So those are the members of the Leadership Search Team. Thank you very much for being a part of this team. Karen Knopfseger was also part of the team. And on December 18, we had our first meeting. And at that meeting, Eric was chosen as the secretary. And Karen and I were probably the ones in the group that had the most openness, I guess, to being chair, but I shared this at her service as well, that I didn't feel I had the time to, but she was ready and willing. And it was actually very exciting to be part of that. And I remember going home after the meeting feeling very good about her being the chair and me doing some of the upfront things because she wasn't able to with her hip. Obviously, things have changed since then. We don't know why, all the reasons are for that, but it is what happened, and we will certainly miss her presence on the committee. One of the first things we need to do is to determine whether we're going to replace her and actually her giftedness on the committee, and that'll be something of a topic at our next meeting. We met on the 18th. We were supposed to meet last Tuesday. Remember what happened last Tuesday? The snow came. So we actually have not met since December 18, but we are meeting this Tuesday, weather permitting. And one of the things, as I said, will be to talk about Karen and whether we are going to replace her. The other thing would be to reorganize and say, okay, who is going to be the chair of the group moving forward? We also need to fill out a congregational profile. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a list of things and essentially priorities for our congregation and things that we're looking for in a new lead pastor. One of the things we need to talk about is how are we going to get that feel or that sense from the congregation. And so how we'll do that, we're not sure exactly. There may even be times of listening groups or other opportunities for you to get your feedback to us. And then certainly we want to begin the process and start looking at resumes and who might be persons that could connect with us and meet the needs of our congregation at this point in our history. So that's a very brief update as to where we're at, but again, would appreciate very much if you would keep us in your thoughts and your prayers. These things don't happen terribly often in congregational life, and so the opportunity and the challenge of that is before us, and so appreciate your prayers as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. I don't know if there's a mic available to pass around, up here. This would be the point in time where if you have questions related to the financial presentation this morning, I'd ask that you shoot them up here. We'll pass the mic around. If there aren't questions related to the financial items, if it feels like that's passed, then anything beyond the finances, is fair game. Any questions?
Let's see. I'm going to turn this around.
Any financial related questions? Beth?
What's the progress on the Memorial Garden?
Progress on the Memorial Garden. Thank you for asking that question because I actually had a note that I blew through. The progress on the Memorial Garden is we've got about $10,000 roughly remaining to fully fund that. So if I would have been following my notes, can you hear actually? I would have been following my notes, I would have had an indication that about $10,000 should have been listed here. I don't see it as a capital improvement specifically, but it's $10,000 that's outstanding. There's a couple different ways that $10,000 can be funded. One is by people reserving niches. It's depending on what they get, between $500 and $1,000. So for those of you that are considering reserving a spot in that columbarium, that would be one way to help us fund that $10,000 that's remaining. The other would be just specific donations. So to answer your question, from a money side of it, it's about $10,000. And then from the work side of it, it's just getting a break in the weather to kind of finish things up. But we will more than likely go through and finish it when we can get a break in the weather, with or without that $10,000, because we are confident as people reserve niches, we'll get that closed up pretty quick, and we have the monies there to fund that. So, Ethan.
Since you brought up my name, would you explain how this matching fund works? Is this person going to give that donation even if the total of all the other donations do not reach 10,000? Is that person going to give?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to communicate. This was a $10,000 gift without any strings attached. So no matching necessary. Other questions?
I don't really have a question, so I was just, can't really fit really quickly. I guess I kind of want to communicate what I was feeling while reading what's happening, and the question might just be, can we do a better job at looking specifically at this thing? What I was thinking about was looking at I really affirmed the work and communication done by all the budget and being able to bring the budget down, especially during these economic times and all that's been talked about. But I guess the immediate thing that concerned me was just the missions number that went down. And my reflection on that is, this says Mennonite missions at the top. And so I'm guessing a lot of that would be funding missionaries or outside mission movements of the Mennonite church within. But the operations budget has a huge part of it is ministry related. And I guess as we look into being a church who is ministering to our community, in what ways are our ministry budget going to be, our missions budget going to be related and intertwined with our operations budget? Speaking more about our facilities being available to the community, and just ways that our ministries as a church are reaching into the community. And so I guess that's kind of my general thing. And we have a huge facility here that's beautifully upkeep. The maintenance people do a great job. But if it's just for us and for when we meet, like in this room, we don't use it very often. A lot of our Sunday school classes are used once a week. And I really appreciated that more and more people have been coming into the church and reading. We've been, celebrating that. But is there more we can be doing in the fact that we have all these facilities, and when we decided to create them, that one of the main purposes was going to be use them to bless the community? Is there a way that, if we're spending all this money to upkeep and provide these facilities, that we can also just be more and more intentionally using them to bless the community? And so maybe it's fine that missions budget number goes down because we're doing more within the community that's related with our operations budget. And the last thing was, with the equipping ministries, I like, the number went up and it's probably not a big deal, but I appreciate how that, as a possibility of equipping us as a congregation could go into all the other categories as far as helping to decrease costs and upkeep on all of those, because as we as a congregation take ownership and leadership in whatever ministry areas that we're in, that means we have to be paying less people to do that. And I guess looking at that from an institutional standpoint. So I guess those are my reflections. And does our budget match what we saying our vision is, as communicated over the past decade? And then also, how is that mission incorporated into our operations budget? That's not necessarily being a higher missions budget, but operations being incorporated. Sorry for rambling.
That's fine. Thank you, Caleb. I should have said, second buzzer is your cue. If you need to leave, go ahead. Don't want to call up any questions though, but recognize that other people may have commitments that require them to leave. So you can do that right now without feeling like you're offending anyone. One thing just in response to Caleb, I think my personal reflection as it relates to decreased giving towards Mennonite missions is to a large degree as a result of other giving opportunities being on the available that maybe weren't available 20 years ago. One way would be through some of the other missional items that are line items in the operating budget. The other is we do a lot of designated giving, whether it's for Haiti or whether it's for the Christian school in Albania. Those are outside of budget giving, but we get a lot. There's probably over $200,000 a year that comes in for those type of opportunities that are not in the core budget. Other questions? If not, thank you, everyone. Jim. Oh, Jim. Jim's going to pray.
Just wanted to say in closing, first of all, please leave your ballots on the table. We'll collect those after the meeting. And secondly, I just wanted to recognize, we really appreciate the newsletter core team that's been working on the Chestnut Corner. Dawn Moore, member of our church board, met with me a couple months ago when Alyssa Kearns, our director of communications, moved on. And we were wondering, what are we going to do about being able to communicate the stories that we as a team, pastoral team, have been hearing, but aren't necessarily able to communicate. So I want to thank each and every one of you who've been participating in telling those stories, whether through images or through story writing. And we want to encourage you, this is really our church newsletter. If you look at the bylines or who's writing the stories, you'll see the names of our people that are doing this in their own time because they love to be able to share of where God is at work. So I just want to encourage you, if you have any interest in that, to speak to Dawn Moore, myself, or another member of the newsletter core team listed on the back of the newsletter, and let us know if you have a story to tell or a picture to share so that we can be able to tell our story together. So would you join with me now in prayer? God, we thank you that we do have a story to tell. And it's not only our story, but it's